Alright, today we're going to talk about the information in Standard 11 and Standard 12. So we're going to start with Standard 11 and start with the PowerPoint on 11. The railroads. The big thing that you need to know is the Transcontinental Railroad. If you think about transcontinental, it's going across the continent. So you're connecting the east and the west. You already know that the east had all of the industry and the manufacturing, because you know that because they won the Civil War in the Northeast because they had more weapons, they had more industry, they had more manufacturing. So as we go to the western United States, you need to connect that so that the people in the west, whatever they do, and that's farming or cattle, they can get their supplies to the northeast where all the people live, or nobody would be able to buy their goods and they wouldn't make any money. So on this slide right here, you really need to focus in on Transcontinental Railroad. It connected the east and the west. And here's a picture of it. That's just one leg of it. And so you see where the two sides met up and basically connected all those people who were moving west after we win the Mexican-American War and we have all this additional land, how we're going to connect to those people. And we're not going to talk about every slide because that's boring. Blah, blah, blah. Alright, Chinese labor. So I'm going to go ahead and expand it out right now. So I don't know what that says. Graphics. We don't want all those 1800 graphics anyway. Chinese labor. The people who worked on the trains, the railroads, building it, the Transcontinental Railroad in the west, were Chinese immigrants. It was very, very dangerous. A lot of times rock slides would kill the workers, and so to get people to do it, they used Chinese immigrants. There was a huge demand for workers, and so those Chinese laborers from China came to the west, came to California, and worked to build the railroad in the west. Later on, in another standard, we're going to see how, alright, we built the west, now we have a bunch of people living here competing for other jobs that Americans want, so the United States is going to pass a law to kick those Chinese out. And here they are working on the railroad in the west, and you can see how a rock slide would kill several people. And cattle, that's one thing that people did to make money, and they had a lot of open plains where the cattle could graze, and so that's a good piece of information, but it's not necessary. In some of these slides, we're just going to talk about how the facts of it, but we're not going to necessarily test on it. And I'll let you know which ones. Here's just another example of us moving west and we've achieved manifest destiny from sea to shining sea. Now what are we going to do with it? We're going to populate it, and we're going to make those areas profitable for whatever they offer. In addition to raising cattle, people use the Great Plains to grow crops, and crops, they're perishable, so they get old, and you can't eat them after a certain point, so you need the quick, fast railroads to get your product to the market. That's a nice picture right there. That's an even better picture. Steel. If you're going to build railroads, you need steel. And if you look at the fourth main bullet, the Bessemer process made steel easier. So if you see something about steel on a test, the Bessemer process, it just made it easier. And it was more durable, and if you could make it easier, well, then that allowed people to expand easier. You could build more of them. You could have more railroads if it was easier to make. Oil. The only thing you need to know about oil is John D. Rockefeller. During this time period, with the increase in railroads and expansion, we had monopolies. Monopolies reduce competition, and that's going to be coming up on another slide. But you have people who own all of the different industries, all of the businesses in an industry, and they make all of the money. There is no competition in a monopoly. And so what I want you to remember about a monopoly is, think of Walmart without Target. You know, we can go to Target and find a lot of the things that you could find in Walmart. Not all of them, because Walmart's pretty special. But we do have options. But if you didn't have a Walmart and you didn't have a Publix or a Kroger or a Lowe's, Home Depot, if you didn't have those things and all you had were Walmarts, that would be a monopoly. We don't have a monopoly today. There are laws against them because of this time period. Because people were making so much money in controlling the industry, and when you have no competition, they can choose to treat their workers however they want, and they can raise the prices and charge whatever they want. Because if Walmart was the only store in town, they could charge whatever they wanted to for a dozen eggs or a gallon of milk, and we would be forced to buy it if we didn't have any other options. Competition is good for us. And this, I was talking about monopolies. Here's some of the guys that owned basically all of the business within an industry. You just really need to know Rockefeller. Rockefeller, Standard Oil, he owned all of the oil refineries. If you bought oil in the mid to late 1800s, you bought it from Standard Oil, because he bought everybody out and changed the name. And monopolies are very similar to trusts. Trusts is basically a group of owners that come together and control an industry. A monopoly would be just one owner. But trusts and monopolies do the same thing. They control, no competition. They can set prices and treat workers however they want. And some of these slides that are blank are because they the pictures didn't load onto Edmodo, which is not a bad thing. Thomas Edison, he's the man as far as inventing. He invented a lot of things that help us today and that changed our whole society. Motion pictures, the light bulb, electricity, phonograph. If you don't have an easy way to light up a room or a business, a factory, then you can't stay open. It's not efficient. So you'd have to close when the sun went down. But with the light bulb and the electrical distribution, factories, cities, stores, they can stay open all night, and it transforms our society and changes our economy. And that is the end of Standard 11, and it's pretty simple. You just really need to know what Thomas Edison invented, what their impact was. Be able to identify Rockefeller and the Standard Oil Company, and how he was a monopolist and he owned all of the oil refineries. Also, who worked in the West, the Chinese did, and the Transcontinental Railroad, how it changed America's economy by people in the West being able to ship their goods to the East, the Northeast, where all the people lived. And then as a result of the railroads being in high demand, you also needed steel. and the steel industry, helped by the Bessemer process, expands greatly during this time period. And then we're going to now go to Standard 12. So the main thing that with Standard 12 I want you to think about: pretty on the outside, ugly on the inside. They called this age the Gilded Age. And a gilded piece of jewelry has gold on the outside and is garbage on the inside. It's just a layer of gold on the outside, so it looks really expensive. But then when you break it down, there's only a small amount of gold. So it looks really good. Everybody, has a job. People are making money, but not a lot of it. And there are only a few people at the very top. So who's going to work in all of these factories that are now staying open thanks to the light bulb? Well, immigrants. And we've had a fair share of immigrants come from Ireland and Britain and France and Spain, but now we see the new type of immigration, and it's from Eastern and Southern Europe. We're talking about Italy. I just want you to think of the Italians, Southern Europe coming in, and then from Poland and the Eastern Bloc countries, which we'll get into. But really just think about the Italians. It makes it easy just to think about the Italians coming, and they're looking to make all this money. Well, we had to set up a system. You can't just have immigrants just getting out of every port, Charleston and Virginia and North Carolina and New York and New Jersey. We had to have a system so we could keep track of these people. And the system started with Ellis Island. And it's this place in New York where these immigrants would come to, and they would have to pass a health care and a welfare test. Health care, they would say, hey, are you sick? Because we don't want a bunch of people coming to the United States who are sick, making everybody else sick with disease. The other test was the welfare test. We didn't want anybody that had zero money, they didn't have anything coming in. Where are they going to stay? They have to have at least some money so that they can buy a house or apartment or stay somewhere so that they wouldn't be a drain on society. If you've ever watched the movie Hitch with Will Smith and the big fat white guy from Paul Blart Mall Cop, which if you watch that, I hope it was worth your time, because I never will. It looks horrible. But Will Smith, Hitch, was trying to show this guy who had no game how to pick up girls, and he was failing trying to pick up, I think it was Jennifer Lopez. It was some famous actress, and he kept failing. Will Smith did. And he planned out this awesome date, and he was going to take this lady to Ellis Island, and she was going to discover where she came from and see where her ancestors had signed the book at Ellis Island. And it turned out that it didn't work out for him. But if you've seen the movie, that's where he takes his date, to Ellis Island. So it gives you a little reference to something you may have seen. And then here they are pulling into the harbor, seeing the Statue of Liberty. They're fired up, they're ready to go, and then they get to America, and they realize it wasn't all what it was cracked up to be. Here they are waiting to get off. And they're waving. I wish some of these pictures didn't upload to Edmodo like the other one. But we'll look at them. There's some more. They look pretty destitute. They obviously have some belongings. And here they are filing through, almost like cattle, and they're coming up and they're performing their tests to prove that they belong and that they can survive for a little while. And there's the test that they're giving, making sure that that they're healthy enough to come in. I'll tell you, Coach Schicklider made this PowerPoint, and he obviously loves pictures. Really, what you need to know is that life was not fun. They got there and they didn't have a voice. People, because of the monopolies, they could treat them however they wanted to, and so really there was nothing they could do but work in the factories, and they got treated horribly because there were so many of them that you had this unlimited supply of labor. There were so many that were unemployed that you could just treat them however, and they had no choice. Think about today. If we didn't have our laws, we have so many unemployed that employers and bosses could treat their workers however they wanted, and you basically needed, you need to keep your job, so you'd have to take it. And there's a tenement house where they're housed, and you can see the horrible conditions. And they didn't find that American dream that they were looking for. You see, that's a famous picture from New York. How they're just taking a break working on the skyscrapers. At this time, a lot of people start to write books and pamphlets to describe how horrible the situation was in the Northeast, in the factories, and in the slums of the cities. And now we're going to talk about the Indians, the Native Americans. As we move west and the Transcontinental Railroad is built, the Native Americans are pushed off of that land. So they're pushed from the East Coast to the middle of the country, and when we discover, hey, we can grow stuff and raise cattle there, we push them further north. So now we're like, hey, we want you to go to the Dakotas, South and North Dakota, where no one wants to live, and that's where you're going to live. And we know you live off the land. Tough. You have to deal with it. And so we basically just keep pushing them around, and then they are in the Dakotas, and we decide, hey, we want the gold that was discovered there. So they're pushed off of that land, and so there's some conflict there. They're finally fed up with it, and there's some skirmishes and fighting that goes on. The main thing you need to know is these are the Sioux Indians, and it's spelled S-I-O-U-X, Sioux, pronounced Sioux. The Sioux Indians were living in the Dakotas, and gold was discovered there, and we say, now we want that land, even though we told you you could live there. And there's a little political cartoon talking about, the Native Americans are tired of signing treaties that we back out on, and they're ready just for us to let them know where they want them to live, and finally they just need to live somewhere. You see America portrayed as a fat cat looking for profits, and the malnutritioned Indian is sitting there with a rock, and he's beat up from society. And there's what's going to look like Coach Schicklider in a couple weeks on the left with his big beard and that miner for gold. What you need to know about this slide, sorry about that. I go back. Wounded Knee. You've already written or answered that question on your sheet. Wounded Knee. Write it down. This is a massacre with Sitting Bull, who was the Sioux leader, and we basically massacre several women and children and men who are running away, and it's going to cover that on the next slide here. You don't have to write all this down, but you need to write down what I say and what I emphasize. Sorry about that. I'm going to turn out if you heard the phone ring. so the Indian prophet, they're doing a dance, and the people thought, oh my gosh, look at them, they're doing a dance. They're going to kill us. It's a war dance. What are we going to do? And Sitting Bull was arrested, and then the Americans killed a ton of Native Americans, and it was the last conflict, armed conflict between the United States and Native Americans. I'm going to say that again. Wounded Knee. The last conflict of fighting between the Native Americans and the United States. And it was Sitting Bull was the Sioux leader. He's arrested. They're doing a dance. U.S. soldiers come in and killed 300 Sioux as they try to run away. And Coach Hicklider put this picture of what appears to be a Native American in the snow. It's a sad picture with Native Americans just piled up on each other after the U.S. government and the U.S. soldiers have killed innocent people. AFL was a labor union, the American Federation of Labor. You need to write that down, and if you see the word skilled, skilled is capitalized because that was different than all the other labor unions. Labor unions are meant to help workers. And the AFL was started by a man named Samuel Gompers. So Samuel Gompers, AFL, Skilled Labor Union. And that's what you need to know. And labor unions just said, hey, you can't treat your workers horrible. You have to have restrictions and guidelines set up. So when we talk about the AFL, I just need you to know that it stands for the American Federation of Labor. It was founded by Samuel Gompers, and it was for skilled workers. And labor unions really, they vote for people as a block, like they all vote for the same person, and that they can go on strike. Sometimes strikes are successful where the business owner says, hey, I need you guys back to work, so I'm going to pay you a little more. Or I'm going to give you a few more days off, if that's what they're asking for. Other times, if they're a failure, they'll bring in other people to work called scabs. And scabs are basically the people who replace the regular workers. And there's old Sammy G. There's a strike where the people are going on strike, and you see the troops making sure there's no violence and making sure nobody tries to burn down the building or anything. And this is the one strike you need to know about. A lot of times we'll just need to know one example of certain things, like a labor union. All we need to know is the AFL. Well, the Pullman strike was a strike of railway car workers. They made these luxury rail cars where rich people would go and purchase a ride on so that they could travel from city to city on the railroad. These guys started out very happy. The owner of the Pullman company created this city, and he had a park with a pond and apartment buildings, and things were going well, but then he started to treat them poorly. He started to send in, increase their hours, and he restricted them from drinking and made them work longer. And so all of those things caused these people to get upset. So what did they do? They went on strike. And this was in 1894. And the president sends in troops to stop it. And that's what was important about the Pullman strike. He signed an injunction, and an injunction is just an order to stop the Pullman strike. So it was the first time the president used troops to stop a strike. He stepped in 1894. Grover Cleveland stopped the Pullman strike. Railway car workers. And there they are, going on strike, and they're getting beat down by the soldiers. You can see those guys with hats and the billy clubs. So, just to recap, Grover Cleveland sends in troops through an injunction, I-N-J-U-N-C-T-I-O-N, injunction, to put down the strike. And it was the first time, so that's significant, and that's what you need to know. And they got a little crazy and started burning some things. And that guy on the right would probably flick those soldiers off if they didn't have a gun. So, Gilded Age, again, pretty on the outside, ugly on the inside. Recap Standard 12. We've got, I'm going over the standards right now in my hand. Ellis Island, that's where immigrants came from Southern and Eastern Europe. They had to take a health care and a welfare test to make sure they'd come in. The American Federation of Labor was created by Samuel Gompers for skilled workers, people who had a skill, not just guys who worked on the assembly line. So these were like the middle class workers. Wounded Knee was the last major conflict between Native Americans and the United States, and it was a massacre. Sitting Bull, the leader of the Sioux Indians, was arrested, and he, which resulted in to dance and you know, for peace, and Americans killed him because they were scared. And then the 1894 Pullman strike was an example of industrial unrest. Like, there was this conflict between workers and owners, and President Grover Cleveland sent in troops through an injunction to put the strike down. And if you see on that slide right there, it says up next, the Progressive Era. So I've just described all of these problems. Monopolies, controlling all of the businesses, all of the industry. What we have to do is stop that. So the Progressive Era is making progress to correct all of those problems. The ugly on the inside, we got to improve that. All of those shanty towns with tenements where the immigrants are living in horrible conditions, and they're working in horrible conditions, and they're getting treated horribly by the owners, the monopolists like Rockefeller and Standard Oil. We got to fix that. We got to progress, and that's the Progressive Era. So when we go into Standard 13 and 14, we're going to look at how the U.S. improved from that time period. And hopefully this worked.